In the heart of the Middle East, surrounded by mountains and myths, stands a country not easily understood, yet impossible to ignore. A land that has faced empires, endured invasions, outlasted kings and conquerors, and yet remains defiantly on its feet. This is not merely a nation, it is a civilization, older than Rome, older than the idea of the West itself. Iran is a story that began long before modern borders were drawn, and will likely continue long after many are redrawn again. What makes Iran unconquerable is not its army or its weapons. It is its memory. Its people carry the weight of centuries in their identity. They are the descendants of Cyrus the Great, heirs to a Persian empire that once stretched from the Indus to the Aegean. You do not erase a memory like that, not with bombs, not with sanctions, not with speeches. While Western powers change strategies every 4 years, Iran thinks in decades, sometimes centuries. Patience is its weapon. Time, its ally. When political tides shifted, Iran adapted. When isolation came, it innovated. When pressure mounted, it pressed back, not always with tanks, but with tactics. In Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in cyberspace. Its power is not always visible, but it is always present. Iran does not fight wars the way its adversaries do. It fights wars of endurance, of narrative, of spirit. In the modern world, that's often more effective than firepower. The sanctions, the embargoes, the isolation, none of it broke Iran. If anything, it revealed its deeper strength. A country that can turn adversity into doctrine and scarcity into strategy is not a country that crumbles. It is one that recalculates, reorganizes, remembers. And then there's its people, fiercely independent, deeply proud, often critical of their own government, yet unshakably loyal to their identity. This is not a population that welcomes foreign saviors. It is a nation that remembers foreign interventions all too well, and guards against them with relentless skepticism. It is not to say Iran is perfect. It is not to say it is without fault. But perfection was never the measure of endurance. What defines Iran is its refusal to be defined by others. Many great powers have looked toward Iran and imagined they could reshape it. By force, by fear, by persuasion. But they misunderstood the essence of the place. Iran does not bend easily. It absorbs, adapts, and outlasts. Iran is not simply a country marked by lines on a map. It is the living continuation of a civilization that has endured for more than 2.5 millennia. Long before the concept of Western democracy, before the British Empire ruled the seas, before America declared its independence, Iran was already a center of culture, governance, philosophy, science, and empire. To understand why Iran cannot be easily defeated, one must first understand that it does not think of itself as a modern nation-state in the same fragile sense that many others do. Iran considers itself a civilization, one that refuses to be forgotten. When empires rise and fall, their ruins are often swallowed by time. But in Iran, history does not sleep under layers of dust. It breathes. The past is not just taught in textbooks. It lives in language, architecture, family lineage, and spiritual identity. Persians still speak a language that evolved directly from the court of Darius and Xerxes. Children learn poetry written centuries ago by minds like Hafez, Saidi, Ferdowsi, and Rumi. Poetry that still guides hearts and minds in daily life. These are not relics, they are foundations. The legacy of the Achaemenid Empire, the empire of Cyrus the Great, is not some faded legend for Iranians. It is a source of identity. The idea that Cyrus once declared the world's first known charter of human rights is something many in Iran take pride in, regardless of political affiliation. This sense of deep-rooted cultural heritage creates a psychological backbone that is not easily broken. Where some countries measure their history in decades or centuries, Iran measures in millennia. And it is not only ancient history that forms this civilizational pride. The Islamic Golden Age saw Persian scholars leading advancements in mathematics, medicine, astronomy, and literature. Thinkers like Avicenna and Al-Farabi were not just religious philosophers. They were the architects of knowledge. In an age when Europe still struggled through the Dark Ages, Iran was not watching the world from the margins. It was building the intellectual framework that much of modern science would one day stand upon. This uninterrupted civilizational thread, stretching from ancient kings to Islamic sages to modern-day poets and scientists, gives the Iranian identity a remarkable continuity. And continuity breeds resilience. A people who have survived Mongol invasions, Arab conquests, colonial manipulations, dynastic collapses, and foreign-sponsored coups carry within them the muscle memory of survival. These are not new challenges for them. They are recurring chapters in a long and practiced story of endurance. When the West approaches Iran with military threats or economic pressure, it often does so with a mindset grounded in the short term. Sanctions to weaken, alliances to pressure, rhetoric to provoke. But Iran plays the long game. It has done so for centuries. It does not need to win a war in a few months. It only needs to outlast its opponents. Because it knows from experience that empires, no matter how powerful, eventually fade. But civilizations endure. And so, this idea that Iran can be defeated misunderstands what Iran actually is. You can defeat a government. You can weaken an army. You can disrupt an economy. But how do you defeat a civilization that does not define itself by its regime or its economy, but by its memory? A civilization that remembers Persepolis and Baghdad, Nishapur and Isfahan in their prime. A civilization that has absorbed pain not as an ending, but as a chapter. This is why, when outside forces try to bring Iran to its knees, they often find something unexpected. Not just resistance, but endurance shaped by historical certainty. Iran does not ask whether it will survive. It assumes it will, because it always has, and in that certainty lies the strength that so many fail to see. Iran does not seek to be understood in Western terms, nor does it ask for permission to preserve itself. It simply exists as it always has, imperfect, complex, ancient, proud, and utterly determined never to be forgotten. Iran's strength does not lie merely in its weapons or its alliances. It lies in the rhythm of its thinking, the discipline of its patience, and the unity found in its cultural and religious foundations. While many Western powers operate on short-term cycles, elections every few years, policies shifting with administrations, Iran moves with a deeper tempo. It is a country that waits, watches, and acts with deliberate caution. This is not passivity, it is strategy. What the West often reads as hesitation is, in truth, calculation. Strategic patience is not a new invention for Iran. It is part of its civilizational DNA. In the face of pressure, Iran rarely responds with impulsiveness. Instead, it chooses its moments carefully, often waiting years to strike back, build influence, or shift regional dynamics. It understands that endurance is a kind of power, and in many ways a more formidable one than brute force. Iran knows how to survive isolation, manage internal unrest, and respond to international aggression without exposing its core to existential risk. A major source of this strategic mindset is Iran's unique system of religious and cultural unity. While not every citizen supports the government or its policies, there remains a powerful sense of collective identity rooted in Shia Islam, Persian heritage, and a shared narrative of resistance. The annual rituals of mourning during Muharram, especially Ashura, are not just religious observances. They are emotional training in the language of sacrifice, defiance, and long-suffering strength. These rituals teach generations that justice often comes slowly, that truth is not always victorious in the moment, but that it prevails with time. The story of Imam Hussein at Karbala, central to Shia theology, is not just remembered. It is lived year after year, shaping the nation's moral and psychological framework. Around this theological core gives Iran a spiritual infrastructure that the West often overlooks. In Western states, national identity is usually built around secular values: freedom, democracy, markets. In Iran, identity is layered: religious, historical, linguistic, and civilizational. These layers interact, reinforce, and sometimes conflict, but they ultimately bind the society together in times of crisis. During war, during sanctions, even during internal protest, there remains a stubborn cohesion, an unwillingness to fracture completely. That kind of internal gravity cannot be manufactured. It is grown over centuries. Iran's leadership, particularly since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, has learned to exploit this cultural unity in service of its long-term goals. It speaks to its people not only in the language of politics, but in the vocabulary of martyrdom, struggle, and divine justice. This doesn't always produce agreement, but it often produces resilience. When foreign powers apply pressure, they assume that economic pain will cause people to turn against their state. But in Iran, pressure from outside often triggers the opposite: a hardening of identity, a rallying around the flag, even if only temporarily. The West, expecting collapse, finds instead a country that retreats into its core beliefs, reconfigures, and endures. Moreover, this unity allows Iran to exert influence across borders through ideological affinity, not just military might. Its links to Shia communities in Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen are not simply political. They are bound by religious symbolism and cultural narratives that Iran has mastered. This gives it a kind of soft power that the West struggles to replicate. Where others must negotiate for influence, Iran inspires loyalty through shared memory, shared ritual, and shared resistance. The strategic patience Iran displays on the world stage is not a sign of weakness. It is an extension of a worldview that values survival over spectacle, meaning over momentum. Iran does not need to appear victorious in the short term. It only needs to ensure that it remains standing. And for a nation that sees itself as a continuation of thousands of years of civilization, standing is enough. Being underestimated is not a problem. It is an advantage. So while Western powers often seek fast results, military interventions, sanctions, diplomatic isolation, Iran plays a different game. It builds relationships that last decades, fosters ideologies that transcend borders, and teaches its citizens that survival is not a sprint, but a slow, sacred journey. In that journey, unity becomes not just a defense, but a quiet and powerful form of offense. When faced with overwhelming conventional military power, Iran did not attempt to match it tank for tank, plane for plane, or dollar for dollar. Instead, it chose a different path, one shaped by centuries of survival and a profound understanding of asymmetry. It understood that power in the modern world does not only come from size, but from strategy, that wars are no longer just fought on open battlefields, but in shadows, in symbols, in narratives, and in the minds of people across continents. This is where Iran excels, not in matching the West's firepower, but in making that firepower less relevant. Iran's military doctrine is not based on confronting the enemy head-on, but on exhausting, confusing, and outmaneuvering it. It has developed a model of resistance that is fluid and adaptive. Instead of forming massive standing armies that can be targeted and destroyed, it empowers non-state actors, builds loyal proxy networks, and creates influence that is not easily dismantled. From Hezbollah in Lebanon to various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, Iran has extended its reach far beyond its borders. Not by conquest, but by cultivating alliances rooted in shared faith, grievance, and identity. These actors operate independently but ideologically aligned with Tehran's vision. They become instruments of resistance, capable of influencing events on the ground, destabilizing adversaries, and applying pressure in ways that conventional armies cannot. This is not accidental. It is a deliberate strategy that allows Iran to operate in the gray zones of geopolitics, spaces where accountability is murky and responses are difficult to calibrate. When a proxy group launches an attack, Iran can maintain plausible deniability while still reaping the strategic benefits. In this way, it keeps its hands hidden, its intentions flexible, and its enemies uncertain. This ambiguity creates a constant state of low-level tension, which Iran uses to manage its deterrence. Beyond proxy warfare, Iran has developed significant cyber capabilities that provide it with another front of engagement. In the digital realm, borders mean little, and a nation under economic siege can still inflict damage, gather intelligence, or disrupt systems in faraway lands. Iranian hackers have targeted infrastructure, stolen sensitive data, and engaged in cyber operations designed to project power in ways that missiles cannot. This is not just about causing harm. It's about demonstrating presence, a signal to adversaries that Iran is not isolated and never truly helpless. Then there is the ideological element. Iran does not merely seek to defend itself. It seeks to shape the narrative of resistance. In a region where many populations feel betrayed by their leaders and exploited by foreign powers, Iran positions itself as the champion of dignity, defiance, and independence. This is a powerful message, particularly in the Arab and Islamic world. While some governments align with the West out of necessity or survival, Many of their people quietly admire Iran's refusal to bow. This ideological leverage is difficult to quantify, but it is real, and it grants Iran influence far beyond what its GDP or military budget would suggest. Asymmetric warfare allows Iran to redefine what it means to be powerful. Instead of measuring success in territory gained or battles won, Iran measures it in its ability to endure, to retaliate unpredictably, to remain relevant. If it can force its adversaries into costly, prolonged engagements, if it can make deterrence uncertain and invasion unattractive, if it can shape regional politics through relationships rather than domination, then it has already succeeded in neutralizing superior firepower. This is why traditional Western strategies often fail when applied to Iran. Bombing campaigns, economic sanctions, diplomatic isolation. All these tools assume that Iran's strength is material, when in fact it is psychological, ideological, and deeply strategic. It has built a system that is difficult to destroy because so much of it exists in layers, some visible, many hidden. And in this system, defeat is not measured in battles lost, but in influence forfeited. Iran's mastery of asymmetry does not mean it is invincible, but it does mean that it is not easily conquered. To dismantle such a system requires more than force. It requires understanding. And the West, so often committed to speed, spectacle, and visible victories, has yet to grasp the full depth of Iran's invisible war. For decades, the West has relied heavily on sanctions as a primary tool of coercion, an economic weapon designed to isolate, pressure, and ultimately break the will of governments that defy international norms or strategic interests. In theory, these sanctions are meant to weaken a nation's economy to the point that its people turn against their leaders, or that the government itself capitulates to foreign demands. But Iran presents a paradox. Rather than folding under pressure, it has often emerged more hardened, more self-reliant, and more determined. What was meant to fracture the country has, in many cases, strengthened its internal resolve. What was designed to punish has instead taught Iran how to endure and even thrive under conditions that would cripple others. This paradox begins with a fundamental misunderstanding. Sanctions assume that economic pain naturally leads to political surrender. But Iran's political culture is built on a narrative of resistance. Since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran has positioned itself in direct opposition to what it sees as global hegemony, particularly that of the United States. That revolution was not simply a political event. It was a break from a century of perceived humiliation, interference, and subjugation by outside powers. Sanctions, then, are not interpreted by Iran as pressure to reform, but as a continuation of that same interference. They are woven into the larger national story of injustice, sovereignty, and struggle. As such, they don't just hurt economically, they galvanize emotionally. Instead of weakening public support, sanctions often trigger a defensive nationalism. Even those critical of the government frequently recognize the external threat in unifying resistance. This does not mean there is blind loyalty to the state, but there is a shared understanding that sovereignty must be defended, and that foreign pressure, even when justified in the eyes of the world, feels like a violation in the hearts of many Iranians. It creates a kind of moral clarity that strengthens internal cohesion rather than dissolving it. Economically, Iran has adapted in ways that have surprised even its fiercest critics. Cut off from much of the global financial system and denied access to many foreign goods, the country has developed domestic industries out of necessity. Iran now produces a wide range of products that it once imported, from cars and steel to pharmaceuticals and military technology. While the quality may not always match global standards, the infrastructure is real, and the skills developed under sanctions have long-term implications. Necessity has become the mother of innovation. In some sectors, Iran is more self-reliant than its neighbors, with far fewer restrictions. Moreover, sanctions have reshaped Iran's geopolitical relationships. Unable to trade freely with the West, it has turned eastward, to China, Russia, and neighboring countries that are either indifferent to U.S. pressure or actively opposed to it. These relationships are not just economic, they are strategic. Iran has learned how to build parallel systems, alternative networks of trade, finance, and diplomacy that bypass Western control. The result is a country that has grown more agile, more connected to the emerging multipolar world, and less dependent on traditional Western-dominated structures. Culturally, sanctions have also had an unintended effect. They have encouraged a certain stoicism in the population. People have grown up with hardship, scarcity, and uncertainty, yet continue to adapt. They rely on family networks, community resilience, and a long cultural tradition of enduring hardship with dignity. Iranian society is not immune to pain, but it is unusually practiced at managing it. This is not to romanticize suffering. The economic impact of sanctions is real. Inflation is high, jobs are scarce, and the cost of living can be crushing. But the key insight is this: Iran has turned adversity into a kind of discipline. It has used hardship not to weaken its national project, but to sharpen it. It has redefined survival not as a condition of victimhood, but as an act of defiance. In doing so, Iran has exposed the limitations of Western coercive strategy. It has shown that pressure, when misapplied, can strengthen what it was meant to destroy. That when a nation defines itself by resistance, external force often becomes fuel, not fire. This is the lesson the world has yet to fully absorb. That Iran, far from being broken by sanctions, has used them to forge a deeper sense of purpose. The paradox of Iran is this: the more it is isolated, the more it learns how to stand alone. The more it is punished, the more it adapts. And the more it is underestimated, the more it surprises. That is why Iran cannot be defeated. Not because it is flawless or all-powerful, but because it has mastered the art of turning pressure into resilience and survival into strategy.